Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast where Southern New Hampshire University students and graduates share their stories. My name is Rebecca Blanchette, and I'm your host today. I'm a senior writer here at SNHU, where I also earned my communication and creative writing degrees. And as a creative writing alum, I'm especially excited to introduce you to our guest today. We are in for quite a treat. I'm here with Haley-Grace McCormick, a 2024 SNHU graduate whose debut novel, The Enemy of Time, is about to launch. So, Haley-Grace, it's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your time to talk with me and about my writing, about being at Southern New Hampshire University. So excited.
Awesome. So I want to make sure that I have all of this right. You got your Bachelor of Arts in Creative Writing and English here at SNHU with a concentration in screenwriting, and not one, but two minors, art history and psychology. Is that all?
Yes, that's all. I probably would have packed more in, but my parents were like, "Honey, please just cut it right there." So that's where we stayed.
Yeah, you managed to fit in quite a bit. And I have so much that I want to ask you about today, from your time here at SNHU to your forthcoming novel. But I think it makes sense, as all good stories do, starting at the very beginning. And I want to know, have you always been a writer?
No, not even close. I have always loved stories, and so for me, that was really my world into in how a story is created was really by watching TV shows and movies, and I was obsessed with film from little. I mean, like literally born, I was wanting to watch the TV constantly. My dad would rock me at 6 months old to the Lord of the Rings, like that was our family like motto, dynamic. And so for me, story was a big deal in my life. But being dyslexic, reading comes with a lot of fear, it comes with a lot of frustration. And when you're young, it's a lot of work, to read when your brain is kind of working against you. So, words on a page were not something I was able to connect with until I was much older. And I ended up in a Shakespeare class with a teacher in high school who took the time to really allow me to understand the joy of literature and the joy of what a story could be on the page. And it wasn't anything fancy she did. She just took the fear out of reading, and she gave us this beautiful classroom experience that was very lighthearted and fun. And she showed me on a whiteboard how to write a story in a way my brain understood it. It was in a picture format, and the three-act story structure, and she did that on the whiteboard, and this like graph, like a mountain graph. And she took the one of our Shakespeare plays, and then we were also taking High School Musical and morphing these two worlds together and recreating this story on the board. And when my brain saw it, it clicked, and I was like, wait, this is how I create a story, like the stories I grew up loving. And from there, I went home and I immediately decided that I need to learn how to write.
I love that it started with that teacher who kind of helped you understand things differently. I feel like so many writers have that one or two English composition teachers that stand out in their learning journey. So that's very cool. And outside of writing, what are you passionate about? What should people know about you as a person?
Oh goodness. I think, for me, everything in my life revolves around story in some way, which sounds so boring to say it that way, but like genuinely, my whole life is consumed with story, whether that's reading, writing, watching movies and television. Like me and my parents, every single night, I'm 23, yes, still with my parents, but like every single night we watch some kind of TV show, some kind of movie together. And we don't just like watch it in the background. Like we are like invested in all of this. So my entire life really revolves around story, and then on the digital side of my life, being a content creator, I get to talk about story 24/7. So even just that, writing my scripts for when I go online and everything, my whole thought and process is always about kind of dissecting these stories created either on the screen or the page. And outside of that, my favorite thing to do is to go to the movie theater. So again, I feel like it's just kind of all within that same world. But I do have a real love of getting to go to the theater and sit in the seats and get my popcorn and do the whole thing. I'm a huge theater person. I got my Fandango app like ready always to get my tickets. So I'm one of those crazy organized person too. So that's kind of how what I like outside of writing is writing and story, unfortunately and fortunately. I have a cat and a dog who I'm a total one of those cat and dog moms, like find a meme about it, that's me. So I would say that's also my passions outside of that is my cat and my dog.
What are their names?
Okay, so Moonshine is our cat, and I used to live in Tennessee when I was younger, and so Moonshine, obviously. And then
Yep.
my dog's name is Nash for Nashville, so there's kind of a little
Oh,
connection there.
that's awesome. You've mentioned it, earlier that you are dyslexic, and you've been very open in sharing that you were diagnosed at an early age with what I believe you've referred to as the perfect triangle of learning disabilities. Can you tell us a little bit more about this and how it has impacted your learning and writing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphica. And if you know anything about dyslexia, learning how to spell all three of those has been so much fun because you have to write it on every application. But it was one of those things that for me, I do call it the perfect love triangle of learning disorders because it was one of those things growing up that you don't typically view your challenges as something that it's one of your strengths, and it took me a long time in life to kind of figure that out. Is dyslexia wasn't something that was a roadblock; it was really a force of nature telling me, hey, we got to look at this different. We got to look at it in a big picture lens. And I'm so grateful for that because most of the beautiful things in my life have come from the fact that I had to take a step back and understand it a little different than, the neurotypical brain. So I'm very blessed to have had my learning challenges, and I can say that now because I've finally grown up a little bit. But yeah, it's one of those things that when it came to writing for me, like I've mentioned, is I didn't connect with words on a page because of a fear of it more than anything. I can vividly remember being, in elementary school and being called up to read, in front of the class and not being able to physically get the words out and the class laughing and the bullying that comes with that. So for me, reading came with a lot of trauma, a lot of background to it. So, when I decided I wanted to be a writer, I had all that kind of in the background of me of the imposter syndrome was on high level of what am I doing? What am I thinking? But, when I came to the page and it was just me and my screen, and I'm a little old fashioned. I tend to handwrite a lot of my scenes that were in my book just because I like that, pen to touch feeling. And that's something when you are dyslexic, if you ever go into the brain of it all, we love anything that's physical, anything that we can touch. And so, we use our other senses to really dig into things. And so that was something I learned, from my mom was the same way. She, would write most of her things down. And even though the normal person reading our notes will never know what we wrote, because you can't read it between the handwriting and the spelling, it is a true Da Vinci Code. But I knew what I said at least. And so it's something I learned very quick was, if I wrote it down, I was able to really get my thoughts out there without having to think about spelling or words or anything. And so for me, learning how to write with dyslexia was just all about finding those tools that made writing effortless and not fearful. It took a while, but I think also, with the college program that I chose being online, it gave me that freedom to, take a step back, pause when I needed to pause, or, if there were areas that I could speed up and I was like, sweet, I understand this. And then when there was times that I couldn't, I could pause for a moment and go back and reread and reread. So really for me, it was just learning how to look at writing through a different lens than typical one probably.
Yeah, and that translates so nicely into my next question for you is, what brought you to SNHU and why was it an online program that really appealed to you?
So my entire life, I was determined that I was going to college in Boston. And part of my book, the main character, that's a big thing to her too. She's like, I'm going to college in Boston. There's nothing standing in her way. And so that was kind of a connecting piece for me in the story. And, I went and I toured every college in Boston. I toured colleges in New York. I toured everywhere. And I loved all the colleges that I'd went to. They were beautiful campuses and beautiful experiences. But one thing that was, constant to me was okay, how is my brain going to function in the typical classroom setting? And I was, I knew I could do it and I knew I could get through anything, but I was like, is it the place that I'm going to flourish the best in? And at the time, COVID was also happening. And so the world was crazy as it was. And my mom brought the school to me and said, hey, just take a look at their website. Just take a minute. And so I looked at y'all's website and I was like, my mom just wants me to stay home. That's what I'm thinking in my mind. And as I dug into it, I could not find a school in person that had the amount of things that I wanted to learn in one degree. And, especially with having an English and a creative writing like combo, I was like, ooh, this is very unique. And I started digging through the class catalog and really trying to decipher it all. And I watched a podcaster, actually a YouTuber, who was talking about their experience at the school and how much freedom they had to be a creative and then also learn how to be a creative at the same time. And I really loved that because my brain, I know growing up, learned by processing. I had to, like I said, take that time and to really understand things. And sometimes I'd have to, write things out 10 different times in 10 different ways for it finally to click. But once it clicked, it was there. But I had to have that freedom to do so. So I think really just kind of weighing my options with it and looking at what was going to be the best for my learning style and also for who I wanted to be as a creative. And I do love to write at all times of the night, all times of the morning, and I like that freedom. I love to travel, and that was something that, with this program, I was able to go everywhere and anywhere when I wanted, and then just, budget out my time for study. And it was a really beautiful experience being so young and getting to have that freedom at the same time.
Oh, that's so great to hear. And I love what you said about the processing time. That's exactly why I loved getting my degree online as well. I feel like it's hard to, raise my hand and say something in a class discussion right away. I feel like I need to sit with it. And so I loved being able to do discussions online.
Yes, I love the discussion boards. And it gave me a minute to figure out what I wanted to say exactly too. And I think it gave you that buffer time of also if you're a high anxiety person like myself, it gave me that buffer to be like, okay, I'm going to rewrite what I wrote 6 times and feel comfortable when it goes out there.
Yes, I understand that very well. So do you feel like the online learning environment supported you in the ways that you needed, and how so?
Absolutely. It was a wonderful experience. One of the biggest ones was that, it read out loud to me. The computer would read these textbooks out loud, which was such a beautiful thing because it gave me that time to learn the information, take my notes, understand it in a way that wasn't, again, extra, wasn't scary. It wasn't extra pressure for me. I got a chance just to learn the information, which was a really big blessing for me to be able to do that. So I was very grateful to, the school for having that program already established into my computer where it would read it to me. That was a very big deal. And again, the way it's all set up to where I love the modules. I'm a checklist girl. And so having it in a module format, I was like, this is beautiful. I loved that. And so really every, setup to the way that the curriculum was done was geared so well for a neurodivergent mind. I'm sure y'all didn't think of that when you probably put it together, but for me coming into it, it was so, the anxiety of it all was brought down so much and I was able just to learn and to process, which doesn't happen typically in a traditional school environment.
That's fantastic. And I like hearing that, you listened to the textbooks, with the online environment. I think you can choose if you want to read, if you want to listen to it, just kind of different ways of learning, which is cool. So was there anyone at SNHU who really made an impact on your journey?
I had so many people that made an impact on my journey. And the two that stand out to me the most is definitely my advisor. I had 2 advisors total at my time, and both of them were absolutely amazing. My first advisor, when I came into the program, she stayed with me from literally the day of application to, the time that she left. And then I was transferred over to my new advisor. She was absolutely wonderful. Anytime I had a question or if I was just curious about something, she was so fast to respond and was always there to help me understand whatever I wasn't sure about at the time. And my next advisor, same way. It was just a really good experience to be able to talk to somebody when you needed to. And if there was ever, even if it was a dumb question, I'm that girl who's always like, this is probably a really dumb question. And they would be like, no, it's not. And I'm like, you can say it is. It's okay. but they never told me it was a dumb question. So, I really appreciated their support along the journey. And then I had I had two teachers that really stood out to me. One was it was a creative writing teacher who we were doing short stories. And short stories to me, I was like, I want to be a novel writer. Like, why do I have to write a short story? And she was like, just do it. Like, she's like, you're going to trust me. You'll love this. I'm like, okay. The way that she was able to kind of, break down a story and tell me, again, a short story is the same concept as a long story. It's just, you got to tell that message so much faster and so much cleaner. And it was such a beautiful process of the way she was able to explain it to me that, that later turned into the short story that, became the inspiration for the Enemy of Time. So that class and her like truly kind of walking me through like, hey, find the message of what you're wanting to say, find the message of the story, write that down, write a quote down for why the story matters. That really resonated with me. And then I had a screenplay teacher who, was my first screenplay class. I had no idea what to do or what I was doing. And he recommended like 20 different books for me to read. He was like, read these books, feel them, understand them, and you will be light years ahead for when you're trying to write screenplays for, production companies. And I really appreciated his guidance along the way. And we did a screenplay in his class together. And that screenplay is now getting to hopefully become something in the future. So which is just crazy that it's something I developed in college. And he was amazing at giving me those hard notes. And I love that. I love hard notes, but in a way that was very constructive. He didn't sugarcoat anything, but he definitely did it in a way that was like, hey, your brain can do better than this. And I know it can because of this. And I really loved the way he would tackle that and help me develop my own thoughts. So I would say all those people, long answer to your question, but yes.
Oh, that's great. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your program and, what made creative writing and English and screenwriting all the right fit for you.
ADHD, I couldn't pick a lane. No, genuinely, when I looked at a class catalog, I wanted to do everything. And, for so long when I was, in high school, I always explained it as I was rushing. I was always just trying to catch up, to get by, to get a grade, and for a long time, again, when you're dyslexic or you have any kind of learning challenges, a lot of the times that's what we're trying to do is just get through the next text, get through that next, moment in school. So when I went into college, I had kind of come in with this new view of like, I wanted to learn. I wanted to actually understand this information and the information that I was wanting to learn. And so it was kind of this open door for me to finally have a little bit of freedom in my own education. So when I, decided like, what do I want to do? I was like, again, I wanted to do everything. For me, psychology was one of those things that when you're writing characters, you truly are writing people and you want them to feel like a person. I wanted to connect to the audience. And so I was like, I need to understand the human brain and I need to understand why we do the things that we do, whether that's, why do we experience rage? Why do we experience grief? And what are the different ways that we experience it? How do you become relatable to the audience in a way that changes the way that they see their own life? And that's why you write at the end of the day, is to mirror something to the audience that makes them feel. So I wanted to make sure I could capture that. And so by going with the psychology route and having those classes, I was able to understand that when it came to writing. And I was so, so blessed to get to do that and to have that experience. I would also say with, art history, that was a little bit more indulgent. I will admit, I just really wanted that. The history side of it is also in the writing world, understanding, history and understanding where things come from, really does help if you're ever going to write a historical piece or if you're ever going to take inspiration from the past into current writing. So I knew it would help me in the future with any writing that I did do. And then I'm also an artist. That was my love growing up. That was my passion, my freedom. I actually, like, not to plug the book, but I actually did my cover of my book. So, so those kind of things, art to me was a big part of my life. And it was a part of my life that was always about freedom to me and always about just creative outlet. So getting to kind of have a class where I got to dissect other artists and understand what they were thinking, what they were doing, and find out how these creative minds were working. It was, again, one of those experiences that was a little self-indulgent. I kind of just wanted it for me, but at the same time, it's actually helped me so much as a writer. It's unbelievable. So I very much recommend either one of those two or both together if you're crazy like me and you want to stack it all on top of each other.
I mean, those explanations, like thinking about psychology, that seems like such a natural pairing with creative writing that people might not necessarily, think of. And it must have taken a lot of strategy, picking out all of these different minors and the concentrations and making sure they could all fit within your program.
Yes, that's where that advisor came in. I'm telling you, she was like, she had it down. So
Thank goodness. So when you first started out with your degree and all of the customizations to it, what did you hope to get out of all of it?
it's an interesting question. I feel like most people, when they go into college, their main reason of why they're there is obviously to get a degree to get the job that they want later. It's those kind of two steps. For me, I wanted genuinely, again, I wanted to learn. It was that first time in my life where I was coming into education without fear. And so I wanted to be a human sponge and to soak up as much information as my brain could and truly understand writing. For me, learning to write was not something that I really did in high school because, again, I was just trying to get through that class. I was just trying to get through those tests. So going into college was my true time to learn and understand, how do I write? What are the mechanisms of writing? What are the mechanics behind it? And then also, how do I make somebody feel? And that was my goal in college, was genuinely to create those building blocks to become the writer I wanted to be later on. And again, I was able to accomplish that, which is just such a beautiful thing to get to look back on and say, hey, my main goal in college was to do exactly what I got to do now.
And now that you're 2 years almost on the other side of graduation day, what are some of the skills that you feel like you picked up throughout your program that you're still using to this day?
Wow, 2 years, that's a really, geez, time flies. When I see that enemy of time, I'm telling you, it goes fast. For me, the skills that I learned in college, again, goes back to, all of the building blocks when it comes to writing. It's something I'm going to continue, using as I write my next books and my next books. And it's really just that foundation that it creates for you to be able to bring your stories to life. On top of that, though, I would say critical thinking is something that is really pushed in the curriculum. And I remember my first year thinking, why do I have to talk about critical thinking every other week? I don't understand any of this. You get out of college and you go, oh, okay, that makes more sense now. The critical thinking skills were so beneficial, and being able to step back from situations and say, okay, let's go from, point A to, point Z, and understand everything in between here, and to really break a situation down. When you're in college, you're doing it for writing an essay or, for a test maybe that you're doing. But in the real world, you're doing it for everyday things in life. And being able to have critical thinking skills, it really does make you leaps and bounds ahead in the business side of the book world as well.
Yeah, I bet, especially too, as a content creator, our industry, it's changing every single day. So
every second, it feels like.
So now, how has your coursework come into play, as you wrote your novel? You mentioned that it started in that short story class. And I'd love to hear, a little bit more about how your education has been there throughout the creation of your novel.
Absolutely, yes. The very beginning of the whole story started in a college class. It started in a short story class that I remember getting the prompt for it, and it was like, okay, create a quote and make a story around a quote, a quote that touches your heart, basically. And I sat there for the longest time trying to figure out what I was going to do. And again, I came back to, why am I writing a short story? I want to write novels. I don't understand this exercise. And so I was kind of, when you're mopey about a topic, you're like, I don't want to do
drag your feet.
Exactly. I was kind of dragging my feet, and I was trying to figure out what was important to me. And I was unpacking a bedroom at the time. I had just moved, and I was unpacking my room, and I was going through my old journals. And as I was kind of like flipping through it, I was like, wow, the things that mattered to me at 14 years old, I'm shaking my head at right now, right? As I'm reading my old words and how upset I was at some boy I was absolutely, obsessed with. And, reading through those and thinking, I spent so much energy on this topic, but obviously it mattered to me in this moment. And that's when this idea of time and moments and how everything is, time isn't this linear thing. It kind of overlaps in all these moments. And I was like, this is an interesting topic, time. And so I just kind of sat there with it for a while. And that's how the short story was created. It was this idea of like all the things that we don't say or we don't do because we think, oh, I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll talk to that person the next day. You just don't know what time's going to bring you. It's not something that's a guarantee in any aspect. And I've moved 15 times in my life. So, for me, there's been a lot of, bouncing around. And that last time that you have a conversation with somebody, you don't think about all those little moments, right, in our life. And the enemy of time was created from all of that. And basically my own brain, like my storm in my brain was put into this little story. And again, I think it was a 4-page short story. I had the beginning and I had the end, and I had this kind of middle that played into this theme. And I gave the story to my teacher for grading, and I thought, oh gosh, she's either going to think this is great or that I need therapy, one of the two. And and she read it and she told me that it was a story that connected with her so deeply that she thought that it needed to be expanded into a bigger format. And I didn't understand what she meant by that, or how to do that, or how do you take a short story that really only has, at the time, it had truly 2 characters, and how do I take that and expand it into this whole world? And I kind of shelved it for a little bit and came back to it because it was one of those things that just kept kind of gnawing at me, and I really wanted to explore the concept a little bit deeper. So then I started writing what I consider backwards. I had this ending that I knew needed to be said the way it was done in the short story, and the ending is almost identical to the short story to this day. And that's because I truly wrote it backwards from that, and building these characters and building this world that was to equal up, this message. And so every scene, you can literally see, like on my floor of my kitchen, I had note cards of all of these scenes I wanted. I just didn't know where they needed to go and how to create how to make this message land with the scenes. And so we basically couldn't eat for 2 weeks because no one could step foot in the kitchen, because that's where I decided to super genius idea. That's where the ADHD comes in. I'm like, oh, I'm going to finish this in a day. 3 weeks later, the kitchen is covered in note cards with tape. I'm like everywhere. And I take a picture with my phone on top on a ladder trying to get this board all together. But that's really how it came to be. It was all from this one short story and this one moment where a teacher pushed me to really think and to think outside the box and ask myself a question that ended up asking the reader a question.
It is so cool to hear about your process. As a writer myself, I think it's so fascinating that you started with the end. And I'm wondering, as you were putting together, all of these note cards all across your kitchen, were they scenes that you had written already, or were they kind of little buds of ideas that you had kind of jotted down?
It was a big mix of everything. There was both in that. There were scenes that I had fully fleshed out, and chapters I had fully fleshed out that I wanted 1000% in the story. And then there was these little ideas, and I call them like a string that tied everything together. And I was like, okay, I need these scenes to tie this moment together, to tie this message together. And that's really how it ended up coming together, was through these big moments that needed to be in the story and were kind of those points, 3-act story structure were those points that needed to excel the whole story forward. But then my favorite part is those in-between moments that maybe aren't pushing everything forward, but really tie it all together, because there's such a beauty in those slow moments in a story. And that's what I really got to do with those scenes that weren't fully written or had any life to them quite yet. And then I allowed the rest of the story to give those little in-between moments their voice.
And what was that journey, the whole journey, like, going from the idea you were flipping through your journal for this assignment to this draft that you'd pieced together, and then the full manuscript, and you held up your book. I'd love if you could hold it up again for everyone to see. What was that journey like?
So the journey, I'll put it right there for the screen. Plug that in advertisement. But essentially, the journey for me was a little different, I think, than the average trajectory of how the writing process happens and how traditional publishing happens. And that's something I always like to tell people is like, hey, if one lane for you doesn't work out, try again, find a different way. There's so many different ways to have your work out there. There's self-publishing, there's traditional publishing, and there's so many ways in both of those. For me personally, it was, this story, I ended up going direct to a publisher. And there is some publishing houses that you can submit directly to, which is a really unique thing that I don't think everyone always knows about. And there are, like, they'll open up for certain times in the month at times. I know Sourcebooks does it. A bunch of different places do it. For me personally, I ended up with Rising Action Publishing, which is an imprint of Simon Schuster. And I knew the publisher. I had met her at a convention like months and months before. And so there was already, like, I kind of known her. We'd already had communication and stuff. So that was really nice. But then, obviously when I had decided to transform this book into something bigger, that's when, her company allowed open submissions. And so that's when I was able to kind of give something there and say, okay, take a risk and see if somebody would like it. And I was fortunate that, the story was very resonant with, our publisher and our editors within the house. And they were like, yep, let's do it. And then I got thrown into the world of, traditional publishing, which is multiple different copy editors, developmental edits, the whole world of publishing that then comes out of after you write this book. For me personally, it was, getting kind of thrown into this world of publishing and looking at, like, okay, in my mind, like I think a lot of other authors, is that you finish the book, you give it to the publisher, and it gets published. Boom, done. No, it's like 24 months of, going through this whole process. And, doing your first developmental edit, and then, doing your copy edit, and line edits and everything. The line edits hit the hardest. I warn anyone right now, the line edits are going to hit the hardest, because that's when the real true red pen, comes out and it's scratched up. And I remember getting my first line edits and going like, oh my gosh, I'm the worst writer. You have that moment as soon as you see that. But truly, like, I think that was one of my things when I look back at the publishing process. It's one of the greatest gifts in publishing is to get notes, because there's such an education to it, and you learn so much about your own writing so specifically, to, what is this equal in a traditional publishing sense, down to like just the littlest thing. Like I remember there was this one section in the story that they were like, hey, this might resonate in where you're at, but I don't think it's going to resonate, worldwide. So how do we tailor it? And so understanding all those different lenses was a really interesting perspective in the publishing journey. But also knowing, publishing is a long time after the manuscript gets given to the publisher. It's 20, you got about 20 months total in the whole process. So
it's neat to hear about all of the different components that we learn about in school with the, developmental editors, copy editors, line editors, all of it coming together to swarm your project, like your baby. Bring us to that moment that you found out that your book was being published. What did that feel like? Who did you tell first?
Oh, goodness. That moment was... It's a surreal moment. I think you go out of body for a second and you feel your heart drop to your feet genuinely, because it's something that you have so desperately been working on. So there's so much blood, sweat, and tears, literally, into anything that you write, that when somebody finally sees it and sees the same value in it that you were hoping, would come across, there's no words to describe the feeling in your body, honestly. Like I truly believe you almost feel like you're floating outside of yourself, because it's just this huge rush when it hits you. And then that moment you go, oh my gosh, now this means that everyone else is going to read this? Like, wait, what? Like, no. You start kind of like regretting maybe some chapters you wrote and things. You're like, my parents have to read this? Oh my gosh. Okay. I think there's that moment too with it, and I think the very first person that I told was definitely my parents. My dad was I would joke that he was my beta reader. Like he read every word of this book out loud to me every night. Like with my mom, like we would sit as a family and read each chapter out loud because again, I'm auditory. I got to hear it, and so that was what my way of being able to edit my story. And my dad would physically every night read it after work out loud. So I had to call, had to call him. He was at work, and I think we were all just kind of the whole family had put so much into this book that when I think it finally was told to us that it was going to be out on shelves somewhere, we were all excited and terrified, all in that same moment.
Oh, that's incredible to have a village around you helping you work on this, get to this moment. And when you first received the hard copy, like, your physical book, what was that feeling like?
So this is like the silliest thing to probably ever explain to somebody or to tell people, which is like I grabbed the book. You unpack this whole box, right, of books. It was the first arc. I grabbed the first arc out of the box, and I started flipping through the pages, and I literally started like smelling the pages. My mom's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, I'm smelling the book because it's real. It's literally real. And there's this thing about like, obviously when you go to a bookstore, I love the feel of a book. I love the smell of a book. I love a book. And so the idea that my book like was physical and that I could smell my book, I was like, this is so amazing. And I think immediately that's when everyone decided they're like walking out of the room like, okay, yeah, no, therapy was needed. We were wrong this whole time. She's smelling the books. Um, but yeah, I think that just shows the unreal nature it is to actually see your work in print. And also on top of that, for me, I did do the cover illustration. I did do there's illustrations inside the book as well, and I was very picky about that. I wanted there to be illustrations inside, and I hand drew every single one of those. So seeing those printed was, as an artist as well, was such a beautiful experience, looking at like my art inside of my art, this kind of concept of it both being there together, and also having, the reason why I wanted the imagery inside of the book as well was because being neurodivergent, again, reading can be exhausting. I love it, but it can be exhausting. It really tires the brain. And so my story's in two timelines, and I was nervous that the neurodivergent reader, it would be a lot. Because I know for me, it would have been a lot trying to remind myself, okay, now I'm in this timeline, now I'm in this timeline, and understanding those clues within text. We're such visual learners that I really wanted to create where if the chapter is in the past, it has an icon that stays the same for the past chapters. And if it's in the present, it has an icon that stays present in that chapter. So immediately you know what timeline you're in, what date it is. You're never guessing or trying to find context clues within it. It's right there, and it gives you this kind of break for a moment just to keep reading. So seeing that in print and seeing a book that was written for people like me, for brains like me, was also a really proud moment.
That's amazing. I don't think I've ever seen a book, that's done that before. How was that idea? I'm sure you pitched it to the publishers. Like, was it well received?
I did pitch it to my publishers, and again, I think they thought it was nuts. They're like, we've never done anything like this. But I explained it to them. I was like, hey, I want to create a book that's meant for people like me, that allows us to enjoy reading a little bit more. And they sat with it, and eventually we got it to where we could that I could show them. I drew a bunch of them, and I showed them what it would look like inside. And once I gave, I think, that visual of what it was going to be, they also thought it would be a really special thing to get to do.
Yeah, I cannot wait to see it. I'm very excited. So we learned in our creative writing programs that marketing is a huge aspect of being an author. And I know that you have an incredible social media following. That in itself is a lot of work, I'm sure, a lot of time to maintain, as well as your website. And I'm wondering, how did you manage to balance all of this over the last few years, especially, as a student and while you were working on your novel?
I don't think I ever learned to balance it. I think I'm still learning to do that right now. That's a big thing. I think learning time management skills is so crucial. I'm still trying to learn that. I still am overworked and overloaded. I mean, just last night I worked till about, I think it was 9:30 at night, and I had started working at 7 a.m. in the morning, and I don't stop in between. That's lit. But that's how you have to do it to fit everything in. So I think burnout is something that I'm always like constantly trying to like check myself on, and understanding your own personal cues of it all. But learning to market a book, it's very hard. And social media, I'm very fortunate that I have been able to grow this online following of people who are absolutely hilarious and amazing. My favorite thing in the world is going into the comments and just like talking with people on there, because we're all like, most of us are all crazy obsessed about some fandom, and so we get to like chat on the comments about it together. And I've actually made like good friends from like people just like randomly in the comments together, specifically about, we're probably talking about Vampire Diaries or Damon Salvatore, something like that is definitely what we're off on. So, getting to do that has been, again, such an amazing experience of creating this online community, seeing the way they've read the description of my book and they've pre-ordered it, and they come into the comments and they tell me, how excited they are to read it, or people who have read the arc and, tell me their opinions about the book, and, and what the book taught them and things. And I've just loved that experience of this communication with everyone online. But again, learning how to market a book, and learning how to carve out that space, it's a whole other full-time job, and trying to figure it all out together. And it's something I'm going to continually have to learn, I think, and to create time for like actual like social life. That hasn't happened yet. That's okay. But it's all a big grateful moment, and I'm just trying to stay in the moment while it all happens, and feel it all as it's all coming together. But I am so excited to go on the book tour for the book, and that's part of that marketing experience, and going out there and meeting everyone in person. And I'm so used to doing everything on screen, everything online, and so getting to meet people I've talked with forever in my little community in person is something I'm just really looking forward to.
Oh, that's exciting. When does the tour kick off, and where?
Yeah, right now. So it kicks off in Denton, Texas, and it'll be on February 21st. There we go. February 21st. And then I immediately drive to Austin, Texas, and then we're there for the 22nd. So that's going to start in the Texas area, which is kind of a unique experience for me as well, because I lived in Texas for a little bit. So again, it kind of feels like coming home. And then from there, I go to Knoxville, Tennessee, which is another place I used to live. So, and it's right at that 5-year mark since I've been in Knoxville. So I'm like, wait, it's so parallel to my book and my character coming back to her hometown after 5 years. Very kind of funny. At 23, I'm 23. So it's like a very weird combo there. But it's very exciting to get to go back to these places and see friends and everything. And then again, meet everyone in person for it. But we'll be bouncing around pretty much everywhere. It's going to go for a while.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure it'll be exhausting, but also so awesome to be able to celebrate all your hard work. Thinking about aspiring novelists, the aspiring novelists listening in on our conversation as they work on their creative writing degree, if you could give them one piece of advice, what would it be?
Write honestly without editing your first draft. Don't think about anyone reading it. Don't think about an editor. Don't think about marketability. Don't think about literally anything other than writing 1,000% honest to yourself. That, I had written other things before this book, whether that was short stories or parts of novels and things like that. And I think the biggest thing that I did wrong was that I was always thinking with an editor's brain. I was always thinking with, you write this page, you go back and fix it. You write this page, you go back and fix it. You're never moving forward, or you're constantly questioning yourself as you're writing. With this book, I wrote it so fast. I wrote it in such a I had to get this out. I had to get the words out. I wrote it so fast, my first draft, I didn't even edit a single word until I got back, until I was done. That is my biggest advice is write your first draft in the messiest, ugliest form. I don't care if it's in the right, like it does not have to be spaced right, nothing has to be spelled right. Just literally write so honestly that it's a gigantic mess, and then allow yourself at the very end of it, who is now a better writer because you've written something in completion, to go back and fix it and to tailor it and make sure that message comes across the way you want it to. But in that moment, if you're writing honestly, what you wanted to say is going to be on that page. You can polish it later, but just write honestly for that first draft.
That's fantastic advice. Thank you for that. Now, I would love to move into our final segment of this call. It's a lightning round. We call it brain breaks. It's basically, I'm going to ask you some really quick, fun questions that you could then respond to with whatever comes to mind first. Does that sound good?
Okay.
So where does inspiration strike you?
In the worst times possible. It's always at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm either like staying up all night or I'm up early in the morning. It's always at that moment when the house is really quiet. And then I need noise. So I'm constantly putting on like music to give me some like noise at the same time. And then it also strikes with way too much caffeine. I'm a huge coffee girl, and Monster energy drink, like I said, I'm a huge coffee girl. So those two together is my inspiration.
Monster energy drinks at 4 a.m.
Yeah, exactly.
So what is it that you're listening to while you write?
I make a playlist for every story that feels like the story. I'm a huge proponent of that. I'm very auditory, and I believe there's so much feeling that comes from music. And again, it's another art form and another way of telling story. So I create an entire playlist for any story that I'm writing that gives me the same feeling that I want to give the audience, because it's a way that it's a way it comes out. It'll start coming out the right way that you want it to when you're listening to something that gives you the same feeling.
Describe your favorite place to write.
I typically end up writing in my room, in bed. I have this thing. I like to be very cozy when I'm writing. So it's got to be like a huge couch, a huge chair, or a bed. I got to be in that cozy space. So that's probably where I end up writing. My favorite place to write ever, though, is probably like on a screened-in porch somewhere. So I'm like half in nature. I like to get to feel the air around me. Being in an area that's like a hot weather, it's good to have a fan, I would say right now, because the summer months are about to come up. So I'm thinking about that in my head. Or a heater when it's freezing like it is right now. But I really love to be in some kind of like screened in porch or big sunny window in front of me. Like I want to see the outside somehow.
Do you have a writing snack of choice?
Wheat thins are becoming like, it's this one, like we devour them in my household. I'm a huge salt person, but they also have like this little sweetness to them. So I think wheat thins, I consume a whole box of those a week. Like it's becoming a health issue. Like I'm obsessed with them.
And then my last question for you is, since I know you're part of a large book talk community, I just have to ask, what are you reading right now?
Oh, I have like 4 books. That I'm constantly going between all of them. I finished one. This was a while ago now, actually, but I finished one that I'll shout out that I absolutely loved. It was a great brain break book. It's so funny, so hilarious, and just really fun. It's the title of it. So it's from a good friend of mine actually who wrote it, and so the title of it's called. Warning now. It's called it's like puck, so like a puck, that you hit, and then so puck you. But it's like a hockey romance, and with that going around right now, that was a book that I finished, and it was such a fun romance that's just hilarious, and the banter between everyone in there, I was like squealing about it. So absolutely love that. And again, like I said, a friend of mine wrote it, and she just like killed it. It was so good. So definitely that was one I just finished. And then right now I'm actually looking for my next, I want a deep book that's like a historical fiction. I want a deep historical fiction. So that's my next book I'm like on the hunt for. I want something with a little lesson, some passion. I want to cry, I want to laugh. So that's what I'm on the hunt for right now.
Absolutely. I think Rebecca Yarros has some good historical fiction that I've enjoyed.
Okay, I'm gonna look that up.
Well, this has been such a delight, Haley-Grace. Is there anything else, that you think we should know about you? Anything else you'd like to share about, what's next before we close out this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the book tour is coming up soon. So if you are in any of the states that I'll be at, I'd love to see anyone in person. Also, the book comes out February 17th, 2026. It should be in all Barnes and Nobles across the country, which is really exciting to get to see my book in those, the stores that I grew up running around, and getting to see it on a table and all of that's going to be amazing. Also, 83 indie bookstores have purchased it to have it in their store, which is something I'm so passionate about. The fact, the indie bookstores and that they're taking a risk to buy my book, it's a lot for them. And so I'm so appreciative of that. So, go take a look and see if your local indie bookstore has it. Cause it was something that I was really touched to hear that 83 of them had bought my book. So
Oh, that's so awesome. Well, thank you so much, Haley-Grace.